See, this is such a professional setup. I feel like a rock star up here with this microphone. Normally I have a lavalier. So I want to thank you all so very much. I want to let you know that it's really difficult to see individual faces, but I know that I have a lot of wonderful friends here, both very, very new and very old friends in here, and I'm very grateful to have you here. I'm also really grateful that you all speak English. I am embarrassed and ashamed to say most Americans only speak one language, and I am among those. And I keep thinking that at my age it's time to pick up another language. I have a feeling, however, to speak Icelandic is very difficult. I don't know, you could tell me. Thank you to Sam and the rest of, there you are, for inviting me to this amazing event. When I walked into the room today, I saw just this enormous crowd. And I understand that there are many professionals in here, many lay people, and that I suspect, as Miles said, that many of you are in recovery. I myself came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1987. I came in at 42, so now you know how old I am. And like Sola, I am the really cool grandma, and that's because I was a really terrible mother. And so I've been able to make amends by being the grandmother to my grandchildren. They think I'm cool. Of course, having pink in your hair helps. You know, they think that that's like really an important gift to have. I was telling Miles, I wish we had kind of flipped-flop, because, you know, he's such an extraordinary speaker, and he's beautifully motivating, and he and I have worked together over the years very often. I'm going to be talking to you about trauma, and sometimes that can make the room a little uncomfortable. And I'm hoping that you will take this journey with me as I share with you my experience of trauma and becoming a trauma therapist. In order to do that, I had to be a trauma survivor, a person who was chronically relapsing and not understanding why I was chronically relapsing. And so when I did get sober, like many people in the U.S. back then, somehow you got sober and all of a sudden you had this knowledge, and many of us went into counseling as our life's work, and that's what happened to me. Fortunately, I had some education behind me. But in fact, that was the beginning of me being able to understand trauma, and I'll talk more about that. Okay. The important part of this is the trauma heart. You know, when I was a little girl of 8 and 9 and 10, you know, one of my dreams was to be a writer, and I didn't even begin to start writing this book until I was 70 years old. And what an amazing opportunity and what a gift to be able to do that. Trying to find the right title for it, The Trauma Heart, what I was trying to say was there is something that happens to us when we've been traumatized, and it has everything to do with the soul wound, the heart wound, and so that was the reason for the title. But the subtitle, We Are Not Bad People Trying to Be Good, We're Wounded People Trying to Heal, comes from a place of the beginnings of my recovery. I was a very low-bottom alcoholic drug addict, IV drug user, with a lot of baggage behind me, institutions and jails and all those things that the big book promises we'll experience. I experienced. I was in and out of treatment, in and out of detox, and the first time I went to treatment, interestingly enough, I could always clean up pretty well when I went in, and my sister took me, and they thought my sister was the client because I did such a better job of being a chameleon. But I ended up in treatment that day, did admit, and that evening there was a female speaker. And I had so many secrets in my heart then. There were so many reasons why I couldn't get sober. I had been chronically relapsing, and that last summer I was in detox 6 times. And as I listened to this woman speak, she began to tell all my secrets, things that I never thought that I would ever tell another human being, things that filled me with shame and remorse and regret, things that filled my heart with the picture of myself as a despicable human being, as so much less than. And that was a feeling that I had had a good bit of my life. And as she spoke and she was telling my secrets, there was something that was beginning to happen to me, because at that point in time, I thought there was no one who could have had those kinds of secrets except me. No one who could have done the kinds of things that I had done or had the things done to me that were done. And she shared about what it was like being an addict and having children, and how terribly she raised her children, the things that she'd done in lieu of her addiction, what she was willing and capable of doing. I understand now, of course, today, that under the influence we're capable of anything, absolutely anything. And at the same time knowing that in our soul that's not who we are. I didn't know that then. I thought for sure that I was going to go to hell because I was one of those young ladies raised in the Catholic Church to believe that that was going to happen to me, or I was going to get stuck somewhere in limbo. In any case, at the end of her sharing, she said, "We are not bad people trying to get good. We're sick people trying to heal." I didn't get sober that trip, but I got sober the next year. But when she said that, something about the way she said it lifted this darkness off of my heart, gave me the hope that maybe in fact I wasn't such a horrendous, evil human being. When she spoke, she gave me the understanding of what this was to be a recipient of this disease, and that I needed to be responsible for my behaviors, but my behaviors didn't make me who I was. I got sober the next year, 1987, and quickly thereafter, probably 89, amazingly, I became a counselor and continued on and became a therapist. And I was working with a lot of folks who had those feelings that I had. And what I could guarantee, that everyone who came in front of me had those feelings of guilt and remorse and shame, and believes that they were unworthy of treatment, but there was this little bit of hope, Now, I hadn't even begun to do trauma work yet because I didn't know what that was, but I soon found out what that was. I was going into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, which saved my life. I can promise you that most of my recovery, I have been practicing these principles in all my affairs, living these principles in all my affairs. And when I have not are the times that have been dark for me. But the program gave me that, the fellowship gave me that, the connection that we have as human beings gave me that. But I also recognized that when I would go into those rooms, that people would say, "You'd better not work on that trauma work till you're 5 years sober." The dilemma was the clients I was working with were not able to stay sober for 5 years in order to get to the trauma work. And I started to really begin to understand and wonder, what could we do to intervene on that? Because if I'd been able to work on my trauma along with the same time that I was getting sober, I may not have been relapsing so often. And that is definitely my belief. And the research shows that, number one, 90% of all addicts are trauma survivors, and that unresolved trauma issues are the primary cause of relapse. And I love that the research has shown that, because I've been working with that principle for a very, very long time, and the research is recent. And we'll talk more about that. When that happens for us, when we're in our addiction, and those memories, and let me back up a little bit. We're always told that we don't feel comfortable in our own skins. And when that happens is when we start using whatever it is we use. And not just substances, of course, and we'll talk about process addictions too. But it comes to that place where we're not comfortable. And for me, I was never sober more than 3 days, not ever, not from the time I was 18 till I was 42, not ever. Because 3 days was about all I could stand to be in my own skin. I didn't recognize it then, I didn't understand what was going on, But the memories and flashbacks and the uncomfortability would come raging up, and the next thing I know, I would be using, even though I had sworn I wasn't going to. Even though I was affecting my children, even when I was pregnant, using a different drug with each pregnancy. Those times to try and be without substances, being without release, or that soothing that I needed, I was incapable of doing that. And so for all of those years, never more than 3 days, never more than 3 days. When we get to that place, we have just a few choices. When we get to that place where my body is so uncomfortable, my soul is so uncomfortable, and I can't bear to be Judy Crane that day, although it was a different Judy then. It was Judy Taylor, Judy Pecca, now I'm Judy Crane. But when I couldn't stand to be Judy, the choices were really simple. I could go crazy, which incidentally, I've been there. Been in a psych unit for 3 weeks, and it was not pretty. Or you can commit suicide, which by the grace of God has never been an option for me, although I was doing it slowly. Or we can relapse. And the truth is, relapse is the sanest option. Now, how do you tell that to a room full of sober people, that relapse is a sane option? But at that moment of time, when all else is going to the pot for us, when those feelings are there and we don't know what to do, and we don't have support, and we don't know that trauma and relapse connect, that becomes the option. Or we can do the trauma work, which is the fourth option, and that's what Miles was talking about. And so that's what I'm here to talk about. I suspect that you'll be uncomfortable. That was not my intent to make you uncomfortable. It's my intent to shift your perspective a bit, just as Miles was talking about. I have to tell you, I've connected with every one of these speakers. Sam, you did a magnificent job pulling this together, because it is about the holistic part of being a human being, the holistic part of being in recovery. It's a whole lot more than meetings. It's a whole lot more. And it is absolutely about connection and relationships. In any case, I guess I should get started with this PowerPoint. The PowerPoint helps me to stay focused. So when we talk about trauma defined, trauma is simple and it's complex, it's silent and subtle, and it's loud and ugly. It's sad and lonely. It's an ache that can't be explained. It's a secret that burrows into the soul. It takes a perfectly created being and changes them forever. Our traumas may look the same and yet create very different journeys. Our traumas may be very different and yet create a kindred spirit, a mirror to our pain. Our traumas cause us loss of connection and detachment. Healing creates connection and attachment. What I know is that we experience traumas and oftentimes think that we're unique. And the truth is that in this room, if I have you start standing up and sitting down to a list of traumas, and you were able to be open and willing to share that in this room, you'd be amazed at how many of us share so many traumas, layers and layers and layers of trauma. And I hope that we can begin to talk about that. Because if we are professionals in this field and we continue to allow our shame and our guilt and our remorse about what we have experienced keep us silent or keep us away from the work, we're doing damage to our soul. And I hope that this can be an opening for you. So this is the Trauma Heart Me Too. Initially, what I want you to know is that the Me Too is that if, again, the list, and we'll talk about the list of traumas beginning with abandonment and neglect, bullying, moving a lot, divorce, attending lots of schools, fires, natural disasters, accidents. I always love a room full of addicts and alcoholics, because if I say, how many of you have had an automobile accident? Can you all stand if you've had an automobile accident or a motorcycle accident, please? Can you do that? Oh, okay. Automobile, motorcycle, something like that. Okay. Sit down if you've only had one. Sit down if you've only had 2. Sit down if you've only had 3. Sit down if you've only had 4. Only had 5. And is anybody standing still? Yeah. The record for us is 12 in a room like this. So when we talk about layers of trauma, does it surprise you that so many of you have had multiple accidents? That's give and take. Does it surprise you? Yes, yes. But in a room full of folks who work in the field or who are in a fellowship, it's not so surprising. And the point of that is, if I were to have you do that about a lot of different traumas, I suspect you would be surprised at how many of us have very, very similar experiences. So when we talk about me too, that's the point. That's the point. So when I have clients come in, and we're in a community of clients, we often do an exercise called All My Friends, but I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. And All My Friends helps us to find out that we're not unique. So do you know Gabor Mate, Dr. Mate? He's an amazing man. So I've been doing this work for a really long time, almost 30 years. And for the longest time, you know, I know Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine and Christine Courtois, and I've had dinner with all of them. And they are the first people to say to you, I know everything about trauma, but I don't know anything about addiction. Does that surprise you that those trauma experts know nothing about addiction? But they don't. But Gabor Mate does. And so the first time I heard him speak, I was astounded. I could not believe that finally someone was showing the research about what we knew was the truth. And so what Gabor says is, if people who become severe addicts, as shown by all the studies, were for the most part abused children, then we realize that the war on drugs is actually waged against people that were abused from the moment they were born or from an early age on. In other words, we are punishing people for having been abused. That's the first point. The second point is that the research clearly shows that the biggest driver of addictive relapse and addictive behavior is actually stress, PTSD. And so when he talks about childhood abuse, we're not just talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about a myriad of things. As I said, we're talking about bullying, we're talking about abandonment and neglect, which is very common, and abandonment and neglect are the deepest, darkest traumas that we can experience. So all of those pieces, if we're experiencing them, and if you're like me, then I'm sure you have spoken with your clients and recognize how many of them have experienced those kinds of abuses. And so that whole piece of the connection of relapse and trauma is a absolutely astounding and extraordinary piece of information, which for me brought me to the point of how can we do this while we're in treatment, and that's what we've been doing for a very long time. This artist is Fabiano Napoleoni, and I was walking through downtown Disney in Orlando. I live above Orlando with my grandchildren, and this picture was in the window of a store that was an art store, and it took my breath away. I stopped, and my grandkids were saying, "Come on!" They call me Yada. "Come on, Yada, we want to go play." And I had to stop for this painting. This is an amazing artist. He was abandoned by his parents, and his grandparents raised him. His grandfather raised him. And so all of his paintings, you'll find these rag dolls, because that's what he felt like when he was a little boy growing up, thrown away in a rag doll. And so his painting is what saved him. His ability to paint and tell his story is what saved him, he said. He also had a little girl, and when she was 3 years old, had to have 5 different heart surgeries. So in every piece of work that he's got, there are at least 5 hearts in those places. But the sign says, "The lightest gesture of love weighs heavy on the heart." The lightest gesture of love weighs heavy on the heart. And the reason that was important to me was because our clients coming in, and myself included when I came into the rooms, we are so used to the negative messages that we've received and our behavior is based upon. that when someone gives us this light gesture of love, we often flinch from it. We often back away from it. We certainly don't believe it when someone says that we are awesome and extraordinary human beings. Certainly not in the beginning when we first get sober or when we first begin to do any kind of recovery work. And this just spoke to me for that reason, because so many of the clients that come in and, we're on 50 acres and I have a little golf cart that I scoot around on, and I might be stopping by and saying to one of those folks, I was so excited to read about the work you did in group today, how amazing that you were able to have some resolution with your father. You're an amazing man, and you're beginning to really allow yourself to become that amazing man. Now, what I have learned to do, because trauma survivors and addicts of all sorts don't hear what we say, I invite you to do this with your family members. So I'll say to them, "What did you just hear me say?" And that client will talk back to me and say, "You just told me that I'm really inadequate and that I have to do more work and that my father's never going to love me." Now take this experiment, please. Just take this challenge. Do that with someone that you love. Say something wonderful to them, or just, doesn't even have to be something wonderful. Just have a conversation and say, "What did you just hear me say?" I'll bet money that 80% of the folks that you talk to will send back some other message that they heard that isn't what you said. Sometimes we get really misconstrued communication that has nothing to do with what's been said to us, but what's been said in our brain. Anybody experience that? Being misunderstood? Anybody misunderstood in this room? Raise your hand. I am often misunderstood, right? And I'm astounded that I'm misunderstood. I think I'm quite eloquent, but I'm often misunderstood, and I have to check in with people to make sure. So that's what that's about. And I think that's a wonderful trauma ragdoll. Did you know there is a stronger link between childhood trauma and addictions than there is between obesity and diabetes? 2/3 of addicts report being abused as children. That means that the war on drugs is a war on traumatized people that just need help. How many of you are experienced with trauma clients? Can you raise your hand? People who have trauma that you're working with? Good, I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so then is this helpful that you're hearing this from me? I'm not scaring anybody? Okay, good, now I can get to the good stuff. No. Okay, traumas are the events, this is my definition. Traumas are the life events that impact us in a negative way, changing our perception of ourselves and our place in the world. And that happens almost immediately when we're the young, shining babies that are brought into the world. There comes a point when someone will say something or do something, give us a look, or say, "Oh, you're so chubby, why don't you put that donut down?" And it begins to change the way we look at ourselves, the way we see ourselves in the world. I use that example because I did that to my granddaughter, inadvertently, when she was just about 3 or 4 or 5, 6, because we have a weight issue in our family, and I saw her take the third donut, and I could feel my heart go, and I didn't even say a word. She looked at me and saw my face, and I could tell that I had just done some terrible damage. Did I mean to do that? Absolutely not. Was I able to repair it? Yes. She's an amazing young lady who thinks she's all that in a bag of peanuts, and that's because we've changed the languaging around that. But my point is how easy it is to begin to take away the shininess from us as children, how easy it is to start tarnishing that beautiful, wonderful, shiny thing that our beautiful souls are when we're little. And if we can pay attention to what language we're putting out there, or what language changed it for us, if you know what are the messages that you are living your life by. I don't know about you, but I have 2. Mine was, "You're never going to be good enough," and then followed pretty quickly by, "Who do you think you are?" Talk about a double bind, That really, really screwed me up for a long time. And my mother she did not mean by any means to hurt me with that. It's just what she was taught. Who do you think you are? And you're never going to be good enough. So I invite you to think about what are those messages and how were they communicated to you, and how do you do that with anyone else, or what's happening in your life today that might replicate those old messages. Trauma creates secret keepers. And we keep secrets for a lot of reasons, because it's the family rule. We don't air our dirty linen, don't talk about family issues. Things happen in the family that we're not supposed to talk about, and we don't. One of the secrets that happened for me that gave me that role a long time ago was when I was 8 or 9 years old. There was a lot going on in my house. I know now, for instance, that my mother was having an affair. I saw the results of that. I saw her with this man. And in our house, things got loud and argumentative, and there were my father would punch holes in the wall rather than be violent with my mother. But there was a lot of verbal violence going on, and I had 3 sisters. I'm the oldest, and so I would corral them on the bed and say, "It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." I think that was the beginning of me having to be a therapist. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. We're all good. Go to sleep. Close your eyes. It's not really happening. And then I didn't hear my father anymore, and I went downstairs, and he had his head in the oven. And I was 8 or 9, and took my breath away, and I didn't know what suicide was, but I surely knew that what was going on there was not a healthy thing. And I pulled him out of the oven, and we never talked about it. Never. I started talking about it in these conferences about 4 years ago. I had to tell my children because, they love their Grammy, and they should. But I told my children because they sometimes come to conferences, and I want them to know that it was important for me to tell you that secret was a really difficult thing for me, because it reflected on what I believed about myself, what I believed about my mother and father, how I looked at them, how I judged them. And it certainly had a lot to do with my relationships, because guess what? Cheat on me once, you're in trouble. Not going to happen. It made it difficult for me for a long time to be able to trust in relationships, because you're going to be betrayed. I watched it happen. I watched it happen to my father. And those are where those things, those trauma pieces begin to start building up, those layers of trauma. So I was the secret keeper in the family. So I'm going to take a risk here. How many secret keepers in the room? Yeah, I suspect. Yeah. And if you need to tell the secret, you can write it down and make a pile here, and I'll take them with me, and you don't have to hold them anymore if you haven't told those secrets. And sometimes that's what we have to do, Trauma is the incubator for addiction. Imagine that, the incubator. And it's the incubator because there are a couple of things that we need. We need relief. We need release. We need soothing. How do we find that? How do we find a way to remove ourselves from the stress that's happening, the things that are happening to us that are so uncomfortable? Well, for me, after that event, and I started to piece this together. After that event, I went into the kitchen, and I made myself a sugar sandwich. A little butter, a lot of sugar. Made me feel good. Took away some of the stress, gave me some release, soothed me, was hitting the heck out of my opiate receptor, triggering my alcoholic brain. I didn't know that. I'm 7 or 8, 9 years old, and I'm already deep in an addiction. And the addiction is just about, how do I make myself feel better? What's that going to take? Today, it's different. It takes shoes, lots of shoes. But then, and I'll tell you why it takes shoes. It takes shoes because that same kid, I grew up in a poor family, and we had a pair of sneakers for gym in school, and we had a pair of shoes, period. One pair of shoes. And I lived where it snows, and so the shoes would end up getting holes in them, so we'd put cardboard in the shoes. So years later, when I realized I had a shoe addiction, I was clean and sober, but I had a shoe addiction. I'm thinking, this doesn't even make sense. I have all these shoes. I'm never going to be able to wear all these shoes. And I realized that it came from that place. It came from that place of deprivation. And this is how I soothed myself. When I was on the road and having to speak, I'd look out the window of the hotel, and I'd see across the parking lot Nordstrom's or the mall. And I'd think, I know where to get relief. And go across the parking lot to Nordstrom's and go right to the shoe department. Well, it wasn't rocket science. I sure figured that out. But in any case, I don't know how you soothe yourself now, but I hope you know how you soothe yourself and have found a wonderful, healthy way to do that. Maybe meditation, yoga, or wait a minute, what did he call it? Mindful stretching. And so, the behaviors that saved us, soothing, relief, release, became our addictions. So the truth is that we were in survival mode from the beginning of our first trauma. You know, how do we protect ourselves from what's happening to us as children? How do we protect ourselves? We find behaviors that are going to give us some relief, release, and soothing. And if they work, we're going to use them over and over again, especially if you come from a family where layers and layers of trauma are being created. So trauma is visceral, sensory, cellular. It's a soul wound that impacts the very core of who we are, what we believe about the world, and our place in it. We experience trauma with all of our senses: taste, touch, sound, sight, and smell, and our intuition, our sixth sense. And if you are a trauma survivor, if you are an addict, then I suspect your intuition is really well honed. We're hypervigilant, we're very aware, we're paying close attention to people. Unfortunately, oftentimes we discount that feeling that we have, and that's when something is going to happen, or someone is not safe, and we feel it, but maybe we don't pay attention to it. Anybody in here have that intuition when things are going to happen? That hypervigilance? Yeah. And that's honed from being on alert all the time. And that being alert all the time means that cortisol is being pumped into our system constantly and keeps us at that place of hypervigilant and alertness. And cortisol, of course, is the trauma hormone that helps protect us in the middle of our traumas. So when we talk about cellular memory, the taste, touch, feel, all of our senses, the what we hear, that's how we experience everything in our life. Everything in our life. And so when we talk about the prefrontal cortex and the lizard brain, we experience it with our lizard brain and try to heal it with our prefrontal cortex. And as Miles said, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. So for trauma resolution, we really have to be able to use our lizard brain as well as our prefrontal cortex. But what happens to us is that every event, we experience it with all of our senses, so that oftentimes we'll have a smell or a taste or a sound that will trigger us or will bring us some memory. And too many times it's not a pleasant memory. But everything that we experience in life is a blueprint at our cellular level. At our very cellular level, it's there. And so when I work with people, what we find is that when we can help them have that release, that anything is possible. All the good things are possible, and there's so many ways to be able to do that. And I'm going to show you some of that in just a minute. It's a complete blueprint of your history, your existence, an energetic expression of you as a holistic being. So when we talk about trauma healing, we're talking about telling the story. Kind of different from substance abuse healing that began 50 years ago, which is really excellent. The Hazelden model is just absolutely excellent. But in tandem with trauma work, it's even more brilliant. So in order to be able to do this work, the most important thing that any therapist, counselor, or human being can do is be a witness to the person next to you. when you look at that video of those people looking into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, that's connection. That's witnessing. That's being with another human being. That's being available. That's not demanding anything except connection. And it's an amazing thing. We do it with our clients all the time, clients and staff. There's an intimacy in that look that is so powerful and is so beyond what most of us have learned in our life, that we look in another person's eyes. I really struggle with doing Skype counseling. I rarely do it because I have to be able to see someone's eyes. That's why not being able to see your faces here is so difficult for me, because I like to make that connection. I like to be able to see who I'm talking to and what your responses are. And so I invite you, if you are in relationship, friendship, someone that you would like to know better or someone that you know better, take a risk and do that exercise. It is so powerful. I've done it so many times. You'd be amazed that in 2 minutes what you can experience if you allow yourself. Oftentimes tears will start coming or laughter will start coming, but there's an intimacy that happens when there are no words there and when we can really be with someone. So as a therapist, as a counselor, that's our job, is to be with our client, to be available to them in every way possible. I often have to tell new therapists, if you're talking too much, you're not doing therapy. And if you're talking about yourself more than you're asking questions about your client, chances are that's for you and not them. Now, hear me. It's really good to be able to share some of your story, especially when it's not for you, but it's for your client. For instance, I do talk about being the woman who was using a different drug with every pregnancy. And I do that because there are women out there who need to hear that you can recover from that you can be relieved of the guilt and the shame. And so I don't hesitate to use my story, but I don't use it because I need to hear myself talk. I've done that way too many times. So I just offer that to you, that witnessing is a really powerful tool. It's the most important thing we can do. So, having said that, this is Coke Can Grandma. And with Coke Can Grandma is Coke Can Baby there on the left. And this is what experiential treatment looks like, one model of it. Now, I didn't create this, but I'll tell you about this young lady. She's Mormon, and I tell you that for a reason. Mormons do not drink caffeine. Hence, they don't drink Coke. She came to us from California. I suspect she'll be one of the first female presidents of the United States, God willing. And she's a workaholic, and she came to us when she was 19 years old from a therapist who's a great friend of mine who believes in trauma work. And she was not struggling with substances. She was struggling with some process addiction, some love addiction, some eating disorder, and she had had previous self-harm. But those things were kind of tamped down. But she was in this tremendous depression, and she didn't know why. She just knew she was depressed, which intervened on her ability to be a workaholic, which was devastating to her. If she wasn't being a workaholic, then there was no purpose in her existence, which just multiplied the depression. Does that make sense? And so she came to us with depression. We started doing the work that we do with everyone. We have some assignments that open people up. She didn't know exactly what was going on and why she was in depression, but she quickly began to have memory, and she was struggling with eating at all, and it was because of the textures. And so we gave her Ensure to help make sure that she wasn't going to decompensate in her nutrition, but she started having memories. This texture stuff was vital to her, and she started having memories, and she remembered that her grandmother had sexually molested her when she was a little girl, and it was absolutely devastating to her. But she pushed through it. She did some amazing work, and then she came to me, and with her hands on her hips and this feistiness that she's got at her core, she said, "Fine, Now I know my grandmother molested me. What am I supposed to do with that? And I said, well, I'm really not quite sure, but I know that you know what you need. I don't know if you need a letter or a collage or a psychodrama. I'm not sure what you might need, but I think you will know what it is that you need. And I had to go to a conference, and her therapist and she began, did some work together. And when I came back, this was sitting there, cocaine grandma. Now, I need to tell you that I used to be 5 feet. I lost 4 inches, so I'm 4'8". This thing towered over me. And I was stunned. She and her group, she had asked her group to collect the Coke cans. She put them together with a hot glue gun. In each can, she put a negative message that she had received as a result of this trauma. And it was in every can. And she put them together, and I was just absolutely amazed. I said, what would you like to do with this? I couldn't imagine her taking it home to California on the plane. Would have another seat. It would cost some money. I'm sorry, that was too frivolous to say, but in any case, she said, I want to run her over with your golf cart. And I thought, brilliant. So we gathered her small group together, and they surrounded her, and she ran Grandma over and over and over and over. And just there was a certain amount of joy and glee that she was able to fight back. And then when she finished, she took every one of those cans and cleaned them out, took out the bad messages, cleaned them out, and at the time I had 20 therapists for my program. And she made Coke can flowers, one for each therapist. That's trauma resolution. Then she and her therapist and her parents went to Grandma and Grandpa to confront them. And Grandma said, absolutely not, that didn't happen. But everybody there knew that it had. And she got such relief, and in her heart was validated for that. She then was headed with her parents to a family reunion. And at that family reunion, her family was asking her, where have you been? She was away with us for 3-4 months. And she told them, I went to a trauma program to work on my PTSD, and she said, and I discovered that Grandma molested me. And one by one, her cousins came to her and said, me too, me too, me too, me too, and Grandpa too. Talk about validation, talk about healing a family system. And the support that she got from her parents was absolutely vital. And that's what happens when we do this work, when we can be open to hearing those secrets and the stories that fill us with shame and remorse, because that young lady felt such shame and guilt because of what was done to her. And that often happens, that when trauma is done to us, we often take that on as our responsibility and our shame, when in fact it's not. I mean, it's what happens to veterans when they go to war and they are in a war situation where maybe they go beyond their moral, ethical, spiritual code, and they come back and they have PTSD and are experience what we call moral injury, because what's been done to them they have internalized as their own sin. And I was working with a pilot of one of those really huge ships, airplanes. Used to be a C-130, but now it's all tricked out as a huge war machine, lots and lots of armament on it. And he had 14 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. And last year he was really struggling with this alcoholism, and his family was trying to get him into treatment. We were doing an intervention, and this man said to me on the phone, you don't understand. And he told his mother this as well. You don't understand. There are terrible things I did. I saw those people die. I'm going to go to hell. And my experience with addicts and alcoholics coming into the rooms, the fellowship, often is very much like that. The things that I have done, I'm never going to be able to be forgiven for. But my own experience, my own spiritual experience, is that's not the truth. But that's what happens to victims of trauma, and that's what happened to this young lady. And she was able to allow herself to heal from that as a result of doing this work. And she put the blame and the shame where it belonged, on her grandmother, on her grandfather. And that's when trauma resolution takes place. Does that make sense? Yeah. Can anybody just understand or feel like maybe some clients you've had or family members you've had have had that experience of being overwhelmed with shame and guilt? You know, it's one of the primary causes of suicide. It certainly was one of the primary causes of suicide for our veterans, our Iraqi and Afghan veterans, when we had such a spate of it. There were 25 vets dying every day of suicide, and that was part of the reason. But it's also happening, unfortunately, the suicide rate in the United States has gone up dramatically, as you might know. And it's been a very bad week with Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain, which was, you know, it's always very shocking. We say it's shocking when someone commits suicide. But I wonder if we'd had a chance to hear the story of the why, if we could have been helpful in any way intervening, because I know that that's what happens for us when we do trauma treatment. When we can intervene and ask, why are you feeling this way? What's going on? Tell me your story. When we can tell the story or drop the secret here, oftentimes it gives us space and room to be okay, to take the shame away from our heart. Gives us space and room to be able to embrace living. And hopefully as clinicians, we can do that for the people who come to us. So that's Coke Can Grandma. What do you think? Powerful? Okay, good. Oh, what I forgot to tell you about her? Okay, so, I mean, because she's a workaholic, she kept giving me, you know, she was giving herself assignments. You ever have clients that do that? Make their own assignments because they have that disease of workaholism. So she had several assignments that she did when she went home, and one of them was with mirrors and a shotgun. Too much to think. And then I was at a conference in Las Vegas, and she called me and said, I have another assignment. Can I bring it to show it to you? I didn't ask the questions. And I said, sure, okay. So she comes up off the elevator, and she's got all these huge boxes. Now I have this little exhibit space. And she's got all these huge boxes, and I said, my God, what is this? She said, it's Coke Can family. So after doing all this work, she had created the Coke Can family of all the people in her life who had the struggle. So just my suggestion to you is, you know, if you got a workaholic on your caseload, just kind of, you know, do some intervention for that. All right, this is Chloe. She's in the book. And so is the Coke Can Grandma. But the picture at the top with those bruises, those are tattoos. Those are tattoos. So Chloe came to us with 7 years of recovery. And she had been struggling for such a long time, and she kept being diagnosed with mental illness when in fact that isn't what it was PTSD. And so when she called for admission, my folks, took the evaluation, had her history, and so I knew she was coming. Well, that particular day, we were having what we call mandatory fun day, because our addicts and alcoholics don't know how to have fun when they first get sober. So we have to help them and force them to have fun. So we were at the lake and the beach, and I had a little house on the lake, and we would bring our clients there. And so they brought her there, and when she came in, one of the other therapists said, you might want to go talk to her because we didn't know about these tattoos. Just let me point out that if you have clients with tattoos, ask them to tell you the story of their tattoos, because there's a wealth of information there. So I sat on the beach with Chloe, and I asked her, what can you tell me about the tattoos on your face? And again, she was 7 years sober, maybe more than that, but at least 7. And she said, I have experienced so much pain. She was an adopted child, and her brother was adopted, and she was sexually abused by her brother and sexually abused thereafter, raped by several people. that abandonment and neglect was bigger than the sexual abuse. And she said, Judy, I had so much pain in my heart and my soul, and I'm sober, and so nobody could understand what else was going on. They thought I was whining. They thought, they thought that I was unappreciative of my recovery. But I couldn't help anybody to understand what was going on. So I wanted them to see what my insides looked like. And so she created this whole mask of tattoos of how bruised and battered she felt and how wounded she was. And I thought, my God, what an extraordinary cry for help. She was sober. I'm here to tell you that I have had so many people come to us clean and sober after many years, 7 years, 14 years, 25 years, but they're ready to kill themselves because they can no longer just bear up under the weight of what they're carrying in their soul. And so Chloe came in and did all of this amazing work, and she was with us for 3 or 4 months, and then she moved to Ocala, where we are, and she did outpatient, and she had lived in a sober house for a bit, then got her own apartment. I mean, life has not been easy for her, but I have never seen a woman with such faith. And as she got well, she started having laser treatment and had all of those tattoos removed. Is that extraordinary? So I hope what you're hearing is that when we do this kind of work, there's a healing that takes place that is so much bigger than any of us could imagine. It's so extraordinary that she was able to take her life in her hands and be able to say, this is how wounded I am, help me, and this is how healed I am, thank you. She's an amazing woman. It's amazing. Now that's Rose Mcgowan. Anybody know Rose Mcgowan? She's very powerful in the U.S. right now. She is not the woman who started the Me Too movement, but she's the first person to publicly accuse Harvey Weinstein, and there was a big article written by her. She's an extraordinary, talented woman. I can tell you this just because she has a show called Citizen Rose on the E! channel in the U.S. She's out there fighting this fight. I mean, just fighting this fight. And I don't know how much you're getting from what's happening in the U.S., but it's extraordinary, the men and women who are coming forward and saying, me too. Me too. Well, the truth is, we have known for a long time that there's a lot of Me Too here, that we are not unique, and that there are a lot of wounded people in the world, and that many of us have kept the silence for a long time and not talked about what has happened to us. And I'm not just talking about sexual abuse. I'm talking about the things that have happened to us that have impeded our souls, that have wounded who we are, and have, as Oprah says, not allowed us to live our best life. When we do this trauma work, there's something extraordinary and powerful that happens. There's a relief that happens. It doesn't mean that the trauma is eliminated. It means that it lessens in its power over us. It means that we can move forward. Will we have flashbacks of memory again? Yes, but they'll be diluted. And oftentimes it becomes more of who we are and understanding the resilience that we have and the power that we have. Who I am today is very different than who I was. I used to be quite a manipulator. Now I just call it motivator. But I still have those skills. I was a great thief. You don't know my story. I'm one of those. I'm one of those. When I started my program, I had to be fingerprinted, and the first year, everything was fine. Nothing came back, and then that was probably in 2003. And like 9/11 caught up with our legal system. And so the next year was 2008 that I had to be fingerprinted again. All of those arrests, 10 arrests came flying at me, and I had to go back and explain why I was doing those kinds of things in addiction. And, I have to laugh about it because it was 30 years later, and they're asking me about these terrible things that I had done in my addiction. So I don't know how it is over here, but you know, they like to explore your legal history. I don't remember why I went off on that tangent, but in any case, if you get to see some of that with Rose, her aunt was instrumental in helping her get some help. And so I tell you this because it's on E. I was very careful about what I did and how I did it, but I was called and asked to be able to help her in the middle of when all of this happened to her. Just everything went insane for her. And so I was asked to help her, and in that process, there was the production company, and I insisted, I will not do anything with therapy. You cannot film anything with therapy. We will not talk about what she and I talk about. That's not going to happen. But I couldn't prevent them from saying that she was working with me. And so what we did instead, I said, what I will allow you to film is education. And so if you go and you look at that, you'll see that we did some pieces about fight, flight, and freeze and what that looks like. My son, who is a tremendous therapist, he was a therapist from the time he was 3. When I was busy using a lot of alcohol and drugs, he became a great therapist at 3. In any case, I invite you to look at that just because of the power of who this woman is. That particular series is stunning because she will talk to you about being raised in a cult from the time she was born and what that looked like. And so it's no surprise that when Harvey Weinstein attempted to seduce her, that she had that whole energy of being a victim because she had been a victim. And for many of our folks, that's the case. When you're a trauma survivor, you often have the energy of having been victimized, and it's there. And somehow people know that. People who are ready to hurt you know that, which is why so many of our folks have been sexually abused, and then we see that they've been raped repeatedly. I want to tell you that I was very concerned last night. I was a little panicked, worrying, because I came here, and this is such an extraordinary country. Beautiful, clean, pristine, amazing people. And I thought, there could not possibly be any trauma here. In the U.S., yes. And we're traumatized every day by the news, and we're not going to talk politics because I would get insane. In any case, and I apologize for him. That's all I can say. But then I figured I better check, and I did a little research, and lo and behold, you do have trauma here. And it was astounding to me. This is a country where there's so much gender equality, and yet, I've read the statistics, and so I am sad that you have trauma here. It was hopeful for me that there would be a place in this world that didn't, but that, it's human nature. So this is going to sound really bizarre, but I'm a little relieved because I didn't want to offend you if you didn't have any. So in any case, I hope you can relate. No, that sounds terrible. If you can relate, I'm here to help. How's that? So tell me a story, be a witness, hold space, and listen. And that hold space and listen. As I said, I was telling you about an exercise that we use that you are welcome to use. It's called All My Friends. And the way you do it is rather like musical chairs. You put chairs in a circle, and you take away one less than the number of people you have. And that's all you have to do with that. And then you ask someone to come to the center of the circle and say, all my friends who? And they get a chance to say, all my friends who've had sex this week, or all my friends who are madly in love. And the group comes in, and if you're a therapist, you look around, you tell people, look around, see this room, see this circle, see how many are like you. And then next, they have to go back to the circle and not go to the chair that they were in. They have to get a different chair. And the person standing is the one who has to come in the circle again. And so you do that over and over again. And hopefully what you can do as a clinician is invite people to get deeper and deeper and deeper. This was beautifully done. And there are so many ways in which you can make that deeper. in terms of sexuality, in terms of abandonment, neglect, in terms of the bullying was beautiful there. But the group begins to take it deeper if they feel safe. And the thing that happens is that if you're in a residential treatment center, you have created some comfortability and taken away that uniqueness, and you're able to, somehow your community comes together. It's always great when you have an upside-down community and they're being difficult. When you do something like this, all of a sudden people go, oh, I didn't know that about you. You too? Okay. So I just invite you to use that. But I would like to know, can everybody who loves to dance stand up? Okay, good job. All right, sit down. This is a tricky one. Everyone who's madly in love, please stand up. Okay. Especially if your spouse is here, you better. Right? Yeah. All of the step-parents stand up. Step-parents? Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. So how does that feel when I ask you those questions? Okay? How about this one? All of those who are lonely, please stand up. Yeah. Please look around. Okay. Now keep standing a second. We just did this. We have a very small, intimate conference we go to, and there are lots of people that I know, and most of us are in recovery there. We have this wonderful 7 a.m. meeting, and so we do this kind of thing. And my dear friend Dwayne Beeson, who has a program in New Orleans, was sharing. He said, I find myself being so lonely. And it happened to be that this particular meeting was, people kept saying that, how lonely they were. This is a group of my friends who I know and love, and they're talking about their loneliness. And Dwayne said, how is it that I medicate my loneliness with detachment and isolation? Now sit down, and I want to know how many of you are isolators. Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you. Thank you. Isn't that amazing? So when Dwayne said that, and it's been about a month now, I mean, it's crazy, but when he said that, I thought, this is absolutely insane. He's absolutely right. I know this about myself. I know it's part of my attachment problem, and I have that particular issue, and I would oftentimes just like to be off by myself, even though I would rather be with people. But I made a commitment to myself that I was going to, instead of doing that I would start reaching out, and that when I got invitations that I would accept them. And so, I just invite those of you that are lonely, that if you can make that commitment, I suspect there are a lot of people who want to see you in their lives, and that's how we heal. But I'm here to tell you that I'm one of the biggest offenders, but this program, this fellowship of ours, is one that attracts the lonely, doesn't it? Isn't that one of the reasons we drink and drug and isolate and all those things we do? So what are you talking about, self-soothing? So when I tell you about my son, and maybe he'll be here next time I come, he's a great presenter, he's a terrific therapist, and I'm really not technical, as these boys will tell you, who help me with this. And so my son helps me with the PowerPoints. They're my ideas and my words, but then he comes up with these amazing pictures. So what you talking about, self-soothing, right? And how many of you soothe with stuffed animals? Anybody in here have a big collection of stuffed animals? I don't know why, but people keep giving me teddy bears, and so now I have a collection of teddy bears. Right? I'm not sure what that means, but how about a binky or a blanket? That's what we use. Any of you used those when you were little? Yeah, no? Okay. How about animals? Anybody have puppies, kittens? Yeah. I have just had two of my dearest friends go through an enormous grief process. One about the loss of a dog that she'd had forever, and a woman who has worked with me forever just lost her cat of many years, and it was as devastating as if it had been their mother. The truth is that trauma survivors are very attracted to animals because animals are trustworthy, animals are comforting, and they don't betray you. Of course, then we have these other self-soothing behaviors, and today I will live in the moment, except if it's unpleasant, in which case I will eat a cookie. Unfortunately, I eat a lot of cookies. And then there's smoking or vaping or whatever that works for you, right? Self-soothing, relief. And then our babies, they are learning the technical things. I told you they call me Yada, my grandkids, and from the time they were really little, like 4 and 5, they were helping me with my iPad and my computer. Don't worry, Yada, I'll get you to the next level, or I'll show you how to fix that. It's really humiliating, but the truth is the truth. They are far more tech savvy than I'll ever be in my lifetime. And then we have self-harming behavior, and we have gambling, and I'm not going to embarrass anybody, but naked at your computer. I wonder what that's about. No. Pornography in the United States is enormous. I don't know what it's like over here. It starts really young. It's beginning at age 8. And the reason it's beginning that young is because our kids have their iPads and their iPhones and access to mommy and daddy's computer. And pornography is not just for men, it's for women as well, so let's not discriminate. But our young folks are starting really early, and there's a tsunami of pornography among our adolescents. In our adolescent treatment centers, these young men particularly are coming in with erectile dysfunction, ready to have the little blue pill, because with pornography, masturbation, they have already wounded themselves, and we need to pay attention to that. My son is in recovery from sex addiction, gambling, and eating. He has the process addictions. I had the substance addictions, and it's an amazing process to watch someone get well from those process addictions. But my son found his first pornography in my brother-in-law's bathroom next to the toilet with Playboy and all those other magazines that were so prevalent, When he first told me, I was in recovery, when he first told me, he said, "Mom, I'm going to GA, EA, and SLAA." And I'm sober almost 31 years. He's sober 25 years. And when he told me that, I didn't know about SLAA, Sex and Love Addiction Addicts Anonymous, sorry. And when he said that to me, I was like, oh my God, I knew I was responsible for the gambling and the food. But when he said that, I thought, what could I possibly have done? Well, I was an alcoholic, unavailable mother. Sex addiction's not about sex. It's about isolation. It's about attachment. It's about needing love and attention. And he didn't get any of those things as a child because I was busy in my addiction. So, if you're sitting naked in front of your computer, you might have an issue. So, you're nobody until somebody loves you. And what I love is that we walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, whatever anonymous we need, because I think there's some 150 A programs, and all of a sudden we are somebody. And thank God I can walk in and say, "I'm Judy, I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict." Thank God I can say that, because it gave me exactly what I needed. I know the research hasn't been done well yet, but the program and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step programs gives us a lot of things. It gives us recognition of who we are. It gives us a family. There's a lot of hugging that goes on, and touch is really, really important, very important, and we get that. And we get to find our tribe, And I knew when I walked into those rooms, that's what I found. It was a way to heal attachment, and I didn't even know what attachment was then. But I know now that that recognition of from one human being to another is the healing process. I also know that if we don't do the trauma work, that sooner or later it comes back to bite us, or we just don't live as best of our lives as we can. So I hope I'm inviting you into that. If you haven't done that work, I hope you get to do it. I want to tell you some of the most incredible intimate work that gets done. I do intensives and I do trainings. And we have small groups of sometimes 10 or 15 folks. And in 5 days, those people become more intimate with each other than they've ever been with anybody in their life, because they come there and they tell their truth. They talk about what happened to them and what they did and how it's impacted who they are and what they believe about themselves, and we get the opportunity to heal. It's a powerful piece of work. I was just in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was doing this same talk, but somehow it's different at different times. And the South in the U.S. can sometimes be a little conservative. So when I started talking, there were people that were incredibly uncomfortable. The good news is I can't see you very well, so I don't know if you're uncomfortable. But I was able to tell that they were uncomfortable because I was talking about trauma, and I was talking about what trauma looks like and how many of us have it in this room. Chances are you're a trauma survivor, probably 90% of you. But what does that mean? And what does that mean about your responsibility as a clinician? What does that mean about your responsibility in relationship? Are you okay with where you are, or do you need more work? Do you want more work? And there were some very uncomfortable people because they continued to be filled with shame. And that shame came rising up off of several of them. They were distressed that I would ask those questions that, do you think there might be some trauma in your life? Because they weren't going to talk about it. They weren't going to talk about it. And they were counselors and therapists. And I can be a little tough. And I say things like, if you haven't done your trauma work, then you have no business being in this industry and asking other people to do it. And maybe you don't have to do it because that's not the kind of program that you work for. But what would it mean if you did talk about the things that happened to you and the things that were done to you, or the things that you experienced in your life that shifted what you believe about who you are? What would that mean? Would your life get better? I'm here to tell you that almost 100% it would get better. It's just painful to do the work. And we have to walk through the pain and the darkness to get to the other part, the other side. But I don't feel that vibe in here. I don't. But it was really, I had an email from someone who was in that room and said it was palpable. And I felt it. I felt as I was presenting. But I don't feel that in here. I feel accepted, and I feel that you're listening, and I feel that you're hearing, and I feel that you're interested in what I'm saying. And that's a good thing, because I speak better when I feel that. So thank you. Okay, I'm just going to do real quick here. Let's learn. Boy, I didn't even get to those. These are just some really good assignments that we do that are all at the limbic system, okay? Work that people do that they get better. And that's Hannah's. Can I just tell you this one real fast? Okay. One of those intensives that we were talking about, I didn't think, I'm so sorry. One of those intensives we were talking about, there was, it turned out it was all men. And there's a family that we work with in town that one of their sons was shot and killed by another drug dealer. And his girlfriend were killed at the same time. And it just tore the family apart. And there were two brothers, mom and dad. Mom and dad were divorced. They were both in recovery after a period of time. After the son died, they went into recovery. And they all did their work, but Dad didn't do his work. Every one of them in the family came to me. There was a daughter, 2 daughter-in-laws, mom, 2 sons. They all came one at a time to do intensives around the grief that they were experiencing and all the trauma that had happened in their life. And they were healing. And Dad was this important businessman in Ocala, had done really well. But when this happened to his son, he moved out to the lake and just kind of stayed there and stopped working. And the whole family came to me and said, please, our life is getting good, but Dad's not getting well. And please, can you invite him to an intensive so that we can really be relaxed in our healing if we know that he's getting well. So he came to this intensive. It happened to be all men. There was this young Brit actor who was in the group. And in the beginning, I say this, and I say this to you. What would you like to have happen at the end of 5 days that would be changing you? And he said to me, I'd like to get off the sofa. He said to the group, I'd like to get off the sofa. So we did all of this work, some of those things that you've seen that I didn't get to talk about. And then, like the day before we closed, his group said to him, mate, especially this little Brit, he said, mate, we just really ought to get your sofa and burn it. Now, I know that that's really not possible in most places, but we all went to the lake, and because he lived down the street from me, they took the sofa out onto the beach. We had all of his family, ex-wife, girlfriend, daughter-in-laws, sons, and all the grandchildren, and his group, and we all cheered him on as he poured gasoline on that sofa and let it burn, and let it burn. And it was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary day. Now, the reality of that is that was exactly what he needed, that experiential piece that said, I am burning my depression. I'm moving it out of my life. And he has just been terrific ever since, back into his life. But it took doing the work. It took saying the secrets. It took sharing the pain. It took being with another human being, allowing yourself to witness, to have someone witness your pain. And it was amazing. So again, now I can say thank you very much.